Compression is probably the most important part of the process creatively. I don't record guitars with compression, but I mix guitars with compression all the time. We don't have to worry about gain staging the way we used to have to worry about gain staging when we only had about a 60 dB dynamic range that we could record. Here's the most important thing about mixing in a box. Never, ever, ever, ever mix on the outputs.
In this episode, we talk with 7-time Grammy winner Vance Powell. He has worked with the White Stripes, the Raconteurs, and Chris Stapleton. We discuss topics like compression, gain staging, and how to record an acoustic guitar, among other things. Hi, Vance. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm very good. I'm good.
Can we start talking about compression?
I suppose.
Because I think it's the thing that was the hardest for me to learn. It took so long when I was starting, and it was so hard for me to listen to compression. So how can we learn to understand and hear compression more easily? Do you have any way, any tips or techniques?
I think the thing to think about with compression is that there's two types. One is you have a sonic goal that you want. That goal being a sound and an effect of sort, a recreation or to be honest with you, a distortion of the original sound is basically what it is, without the concept of clipping, but it's a distortion of the original sound. Or you want level control. Now, level control is kind of different because usually if you're taking a sound and you're creating something with compression, level control will be usually handled to some degree by the amount of compression. I think the thing that what happens is that too many people try to make too many sounds out of using compression, when in reality you don't really need to use it as much as you think. You can often get a lot of the same effects by either bandwidth limiting. I mean, not limiting, but bandwidth, making a smaller bandwidth for a sound, and then using either judicious limiting to make that sound sort of stay in the pocket. Because a lot of times what happens is compression, like I'm really talking about drums and rooms and things, it just turns into a big bunch of cymbally mess. So it's the hardest thing to learn to use. EQ is cool. Oh man, I want that brighter. But you just turn it up, it's brighter. It's the easiest thing to use. It's to some degree, EQ is the hardest thing to learn not to use. It's the easiest thing to use, the hardest thing to learn not to use. But compression still to this day, I find myself learning new things about how to compress things, how to make the track fit, how to make the mix fit. I still learn, I'm 44 years into this. So yeah, it's a learning curve.
For sure. So could you walk us through your approach to using compression on different instruments?
Well, I don't know that I have an approach. I find that certain compressors, I use them like a tool. So certain things are going to provide me with a certain sound that I know I can rely on. Distressors will always, provide me with a sound that I can rely on. There's 4 of them back here behind me. Fairchild limiter always, LA2A will always, a Gates stay level will always provide those things. GML 8200, love it. Don't understand it, or 8900, sorry. Love it, don't understand it, but I figured out how to turn the knobs to do what I want it to do. I have no idea what those knobs are doing, but I can turn the knobs. And then on the other side of it, things like transient designers, which are really not compressors or limiters. They're more expanders. They can be a compressor and a limiter, But I love that thing. I mean, I have it on my desk here um, at all times, so I can just put something into it. And sometimes it won't be things you would expect. Sometimes it won't be guitars, drums. Sometimes it might be vocals or guitars, and I'll just use it as a parallel bus. Um, just you know what tools you have, and you use them to kind of like a carpenter would use a trimming saw, you know, to do things you need, or a bandsaw or a jigsaw. You have tools that you use for things, and there isn't one compressor that rules them all. There's not one that does everything. Distressor's pretty close, but
Mhm.
it's not exactly. 1176s do a particular thing that a distressor really kind of doesn't do. So, you know, I don't know that I can give you any
Mhm.
specific things. Specific is the word I want to use there. Specific things. I will always reach for this. I'll always reach for that. I always do reach for certain compressors for certain things in a mix, but I probably wouldn't reach for those in a recording.
Mhm.
I record relatively unprocessed. I do compress kick and snare when I record. Sometimes I'll compress the overheads a little bit.
Mhm.
Bass
Are
guitar a
you? I'm
little bit.
sorry. I'm sorry. Are you using the for
Go
snare
ahead.
and kick, the stressor and the processing designer?
I'm not.
No,
I'm
not
using
anymore.
1176.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
I know for mix.
Uh huh. Oh,
For mix.
okay.
Not exactly always for recording.
Mhm.
Sometimes I will. I mean, that's the thing about this. If you have the tools, try different things. See
Mhm.
what works better for you. You know. Um, but for years and years, I've used 1176 and API 550 on kick and snare for my
Mhm.
recordings.
You were talking about the
I
bass, and
bust.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
interrupted you.
bass. No, it's okay. I have one of Chandler, one of Wade's 660s. I'll use that,
Uh huh.
but I usually don't use it on the mix. Not always, sometimes, but I usually use a stay level on the mix.
Oh.
I don't record guitars with compression, but I mix guitars with compression all the time. Either 1176 or I've got one of these. Um, it's right back there, the Loop Trotter Monster, big yellow
Mhm.
thing.
The
I
yellow. Yeah.
really like that on guitars. I like that a lot. I have two
Mhm.
of them, matter of fact. So
Nice.
I like them that much.
Is there any instrument you never compress?
B3 sometimes. No, I synthesizers, things like that. I
Mhm.
usually don't. In the recording, I usually leave them to mix
Mhm.
because they're usually they're a blend to taste kind of vibe usually. But piano, I record with compression, So yeah,
Cool. So, what are the most common misconceptions about compression that you've come across?
that it's easy to use and
Mm-hmm.
that you know what you're doing every time you use it. You don't really.
Uh huh.
You're hoping you know what you're doing,
Yes. So it's
but
better not to use compression if you don't know how to use it.
no, use it. Just you know, look. The reality is we live in a world now where it's easy to fix your mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so DAW based recording means you can be a really shitty recording engineer and make a good recording because you can undo it or you can
Mm-hmm.
redo it. You're not locked into a 24 track tape machine. Um, so try it. You're only gonna fail, and if you fail, that's not a bad thing. Failing
Mm-hmm.
isn't bad. Failing's how we learn. So
Exactly.
yeah, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
So, how do you use compression in a creative way?
Um, well, that's the funny thing. Everything you do with compression is creative
Mm-hmm.
because we have I don't know how to describe this on the screen. We have a band playing that's this wide
Mm-hmm.
and this high, right? we need to make that band this high and this wide because
Okay.
that's our delivery medium. But it
Mm-hmm.
has to sound like this. So, quiet parts have to be quiet, loud parts have to be loud, but none of it can be too quiet or too loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty. That's the only thing that does that is either a lot of hands mixing, which is cool. I love that too. Or judicious use of compression across the entire recording. And I don't mean on the end of it. I mean in the recording and the mix process.
Cool.
So compression is probably, to some degree, the most important part of the process creatively. It's not
Mm-hmm.
effects, you know. I mean, it's easy to put a reverb on something.
Yeah. So I've always been intrigued by the way you shape your sounds using your parallel processing during mixing. So could you walk us through the different processes you use and how you use them?
Is this podcast going to go on all day? Are we going to be here all day? In other words, it's a lot.
Uh-huh.
So look, I don't really do crazy things. My console is a 32 bus console. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
my SSL, the one that's right there,
Cool. Yeah.
right there, right there. It's 32 bus console. So I use the buses as parallel sends and returns to the mix path. But I don't use them all the time. And I don't use them, I don't use every one. Some of them aren't compressors, they're effects
Mm-hmm.
or they're time based, Eventide H3000 is in here. I have a wide box that's called a bass, Bedini Audio Spatial Expander. It's this weird thing from the 70s. It's cool, but weird. And I use it in parallel. So these are all things that I'm using. So they're not all 32 channels of compression. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 channels are of 32
Mm-hmm.
of compression. Now, what are they? Well, first of all, I have 4 main parallel buses. I have a 33609 drum bus. I have a Fatso, which is my drum crush.
Mm-hmm.
I have another 33609 Neve for the band bus. And I have the GML 8900 for the vocal bus. Those are my main ones. Now, inside the drums, right, before it even gets to that, is a pair of transient designers.
Mm-hmm.
Often kick drum gets a little bit of parallel compression through the transient designer, either to make it pointier or to make it softer and bigger. And the snare will get it sometimes to make it crack a little bit, sometimes to take the crack off and make it last longer.
Mm-hmm.
More of that kind of bang sort of snare sound, which I actually really love. I have an Unfairchild. I use it as my sort of drum compressor parallel. And that is even before it gets to these down here. That's pre these, the 33609, if that's so. I have this thing called an hold on. It's Gemini Easy Rider. It's a ADR, it's like the Scamp Rack, which came from Helios. It's a 1 rack space stereo compressor that I have set to limit.
Uh-huh.
And I use it a lot for percussion, for just sort of kind of taking the top peaks off percussion and blending that back in. And then I have a stay level. That's for the bass. And that's it. That's all the compressors there.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I have an Aphex oral exciter that I use. It's a mono. It's just a mono. It's the old DBX rack sized one.
Mm-hmm.
And I use it sometimes for vocals in parallel and sometimes for the snare drum in parallel. I've listened through my whole mix, and I think maybe the vocals are a little too dark in the mix, or maybe the snare drum isn't quite as bright as I want. or it isn't quite present enough is probably the key word. And I'll assign the snare drum to that and then just blend it in a little bit till I hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the point of the kick isn't quite there. So I'll do that there too. But it's really used very, very infrequently.
Uh-huh. Cool. So
And
that's great.
kind of
Uh,
it.
when I try to do parallel processing in Pro Tools, sometimes I get this like phasey problems. Do you know any
It's
way to
because you're
fix
doing it.
that? I'm doing it
Yeah,
wrong.
don't do it on don't do it off an aux.
Uh-huh. Okay. So how
Are you
should I do
mixing in
it?
the box?
Yeah,
Are you
mixing.
mixing in the box?
Yeah,
Okay,
100%.
so here's the most important thing about mixing in the box. Never, ever, ever, ever mix on the outputs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in other words, don't assign all your channels to 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like outputs 1 and 2. Don't ever do that. Ever, ever, ever. The reason being is that the outputs, how to describe this? If you're trying to do parallel processing to an output,
Mm-hmm.
there's no guarantee you'll be in time. And it's because um, you're outside of the window of the DSP. All right. And I don't know the best way to put it. This is how I would understand it.
Mm-hmm.
If you use a stereo bus, an aux, you're inside that DSP window.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do, if I ever mix in the box, which is relatively rarely, but I do from time to time, because the client asks for it that way. Okay, whatever. Is I make a stereo bus in my auxes, and then that is my main bus.
Mm-hmm.
Then I multi-route using the control Apple or whatever, however you do it in Windows. I don't know how that is, where you assign multiple outputs
Mm-hmm.
to the same thing. And then I have a drum bus, I have a band bus, I have a vocal bus, and then I have a drum crush bus, and I use UADs. And I put all of those at the beginning of my session.
Mm-hmm.
All right. There's a reason for that, because time delay compensation is compensated from the left side of your session to your right. So I put them all the way to the left. All right. And then their inputs are obviously these parallel sends, and their outputs are the stereo bus. And they will always be in time.
Mm-hmm.
Always. And then at the end of the process, right, you can assign the output of that aux to bus 1 and 2, or to whatever your monitor outputs are, and to a print track
Mm-hmm.
if you want to print it in real time, which, to be honest with you, I always do. I never bounce because I've had bounces have errors in them. And unless you listen to it afterwards, you won't know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, if it's the master, I'm always listening to it as I print it.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually listen to the printed track. I route that to my monitor system.
Cool.
Always. Not the output, the playback, not the output,
Mm-hmm.
but the track you're recording.
So what do you use on your mix bus?
API 2500 and a MOG MA4 EQ4M.
Mm-hmm. And when you start a mix, do you start with the compression on, or how do you do it?
I record with the compressor on. I
Uh-huh.
mix with the compressor on. Yeah,
Always.
always.
Mm-hmm. So can you describe your process for building a mix?
The first thing I do is I put all the faders up so I can hear everything.
Mm-hmm.
On my desk, I'm a little blessed in that I have an assistant who preps my mixes. Mm-hmm. So in my other room, which is kind of up that way, we have a Pro Tools rig that has 32 outputs that go to a summing mixer, Burl Vancouver, is that right? Summing mixer. Mm-hmm. And that summing mixer is configured exactly like my desk. So certain channels on my desk are never panned, like 31 and 32 on my desk are never panned. They're in mono. 13 and 14 are never panned, they're in mono. 3 and 4 are never panned, they're in mono. So all these tracks are in mono. The Vancouver has, I think it's 16 stereo. No, that's all right. That'd be 32. 24 stereo and 8 monos. So basically, he sets it up and puts all the faders in subgroups or whatever into 32 channels, 32 faders, because that's what I mix in. I mix in 32 always.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then when we import the session file back down here, right, and open it, it'll open on my setup.
Cool.
Right. So my room mics, any room mics that come to me are on 1 and 2, or anything like a room mic. Right. Mm-hmm. 3 is a kick, 4 is a snare, 5 and 6 are toms, 7, 8 are overheads, and hi-hat if it's in there, or other rides or all that. Any kind of cymbal-y overhead stuff. 9 and 10 can be an alternate drum set, alternate percussion. It can be anything. It's a little bit open, right? 11 and 12 are percussion, any sort of stereo percussion. 13 and 14 is the bass. 15 and 16 is piano or Rhodes or whirly, anything that sounds like a piano. Mm-hmm. Literally, it's labeled on my desk. Usually, sometimes sounds like piano. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 are all guitars. 23 and 24 are acoustic guitars or mandolins or violins or things like that. 25, 26, 27, 28 are either keyboards, strings, choir, things like that. 29 and 30 are background vocals, mm-hmm. and 31 and 32 are the lead vocal. And that way, that's how every song I mix is done. Mm-hmm. So I will come in here, I'll get behind the desk, I'll hit play. I usually open my compressor all the way up, I hit play, and then I just listen through it to try to get an idea what the track is about. Soloing a little bit here and there to, find out where things are. Of course, I can see the meters. So, I can see when things are playing, when they're not playing. And then I try from that with all the faders up, I'll try to start getting a balance. And then once I kind of get the balance is where I'll start adding, I'll see where my dynamics are. Because mm-hmm. I don't always use all the parallel compression. If it comes to me really well recorded, I don't really need all of it. Mm-hmm. Because if it comes really well recorded, the track will fit in a dynamic space that I can control a little bit with the 2500, and then the rest of it I'll just mix, And but most of what I get is not that way. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. So,
Do you ever have, or do you ever are stuck during a mix? Because it happens to me all the time. I feel stuck. I don't know what to do. So, does it happen to you? And do you have any tricks or ways to break through? I don't know, creative blocks.
I do. First thing is to just walk away. Mm-hmm. That means just walk away. Walk outside, go get a coffee. I will start a mix quite loud in the room, my big speakers, my ATCs, mm-hmm. and I will I'll kind of feel it when I know I should stop that, right? And I'll stop, and then I'll either walk out into my tracker room, or I'll go up front and see what's going on with Cohen, or I'll just, exit for a bit, come back, and then on my monitor controller, because I don't use I don't use the monitor controller on my desk. I just have it wide open. I have an Avocet. I have little red dots that I've drawn in with Sharpie, where those are okay, don't go beyond this, right? Stop here. You listen here, listen here, listen here, listen here. And I will just come down to the next set, move from the ATCs to the ProAx, and then I'll start doing the second level of listening, sort of balancing there. And then I'll stop again, And usually by that point, I might want another coffee or a water or something else. When I come back, I'll move to my NS10s, and that will be about 70 to 75 dB. So very,
Mm-hmm.
very quiet. And then all the way to the very last mix stage, well, I'll be listing at about 69 dB. So,
Cool.
so do I get stuck? Sure. If I really get stuck on a mix, it's usually because it's like I'm doing two songs a day. It's the second song,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll just stop, go home, come in the morning, and listen, and then usually I'm like, oh, well, that's not so bad, or I'm like, oh, what the hell? I just turn all the faders down, start over.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Sometimes that's a really good thing. Sometimes you can get a balance, get your EQ, get your compression all, and then your balance is all wrong. And sometimes you get all that stuff. You're like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to turn all that down. I'm going to do a new drum balance, turn that down, and then push everything up and try to find the balance with all the EQ and compression and things in, and see if you find a different position. My friend Richard Dodd tells a great story about doing a record with Glenn Johns,
Oh, cool.
right? So Glenn Johns hired him to mix something, which is hilarious. And because, obviously it's Glenn Johns, and I would be just crapping my pants. But Richard said that he was great. He was wonderful. And on one song, he said, I need to listen to something, Richard. And so he came in, and before they'd started mixing, and he just started kind of hit play and push the faders up. And he said he just kind of did that for like 5 minutes. And he goes, and it was that perfect Glenn Johns mix. And he was like, no EQ, no anything. Just did it.
Mm-hmm.
And he had recorded it. So, then he was like, oh, yeah, okay, great. And he just turned the faders down. Richard was like, no, that was great. And he goes, no. I want to hear what you hear. I want to hear what you hear. I
Uh-huh.
want to hear what you hear here. I know what I hear. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I want to hear what you hear. So I think that the thing we live in this world is that a lot of times when we're producing records, we're probably not the person who should be mixing.
Mm-hmm.
Should get another set of ears on it. The bad part is today, a lot of our budgets just don't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have the budget to pay one of my friends $20,000 to mix a record that I'm producing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that's the whole budget sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and, and when it comes to like working with labels, sometimes you're making a record for a label and it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. They've got some guy that they want because they know exactly what he does. And, you do your job, you do the best you can, and then you go from there.
When you working in the box, do you worry about gain staging?
No. If you're using reproductions, if you're using like UA plugs where they have, they're based on a piece of hardware.
Mm-hmm.
You want to feed that piece of gear correctly. But the reality is that look, we have 64-bit mix engine in Pro Tools, right? We can't make anything quiet enough or loud enough to hurt anything. At 24 bits, right? The quietest sound that we could record, if we recorded the quietest sound that we could record with no distortion, right? Mm-hmm. And then we had the loudest sound we could record with no distortion, and we could play those back through a speaker. When that sound played back, for you to hear the quietest, and then set the gain for the loudest, it would like explode the world. It's like, it's like 160 dB. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. Because, 24-bit recording, you've got 136 dB of dynamic range. So, think about that, and the fact that the quietest thing we can hear is about, 45 dB or something, right? 35 dB. Okay, cool. So now put 136 dB on top of that. Okay? So what are we worried about? Stupid. It's just math, man. It's just math.
Right.
There's no, I mean, we don't have to worry about gain staging the way we used to have to worry about gain staging when we only had about a 60 dB dynamic range that we could record.
Right.
60 to 8. I mean, my console, this console has about 79 dB of, like the noise floor is about 79 dB or something like that, It's quiet as can be. But is it as quiet as the quietest digital recording? No. If I just put my Burl converters, if I just put them on record with nothing hooked up, and then I gain that recording up about 100 dB or 50 dB, it's just noise but it's the console noise, not the recorder. So, we still really have to worry about it anymore. What you have to worry about is, I mean, look, here's the easiest way to not worry about it. All right, is mix on an aux, like I said, right? Put a master fader before the aux output fader. So, like, in other words, every fader in Pro Tools has a master fader. Whether it's on screen or not is up to you, but every output has a master fader. So just put a fader there. So if your gain's too high, turn it down. Done.
Yeah.
Done. Cool. Now, the interesting part is that there's no free lunch. You are decimating the signal. So you're taking a 24-bit signal and you're turning it down a little bit. But those first 4 bits are pretty fucking big bits. To get 8 down 4 more to 16-bit, you're not going to do that. Turning something down 6 or 10 dB is not changing that bit rate a lot. If you record the tambourine at full scale and then you turn it down 74 dB, you got about a 12-bit file there at that point. Because it's decimation. That's the only way that volume works, but in the digital realm. But just don't do that. My biggest thing that I tell the kids, as I call them, that come in here like from Blackbird or from MTSU, which is a college down here, or Belmont, which is a college here, is when you're recording in Pro Tools, never move the faders. Never move them. Leave the faders to 0. Just pan them and turn your mic pre or your input to your track up till you can hear it. And then leave it. And if you do that, then everywhere you go, no matter who gets the mix, they have your rough mix. Easy. Put all the faders to 0, hit play. That's how I record. And no decimation, no weird shit. Just leave the fader at 0. But that's not how things are, because that's not how the recordings I get are ever.
Yeah, I guess people are too scared to do that. And I don't know why.
No, they just don't know. They didn't have a guy like me as the engineer telling them as the assistant, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
They just learned in their house. So they don't know any better. They just don't know any better. That's the deal.
Right.
And it's okay. It's fine. But we this industry was built on professional engineers, like people with degrees with lab coats and shit, not dudes like me in a t-shirt and shorts. You know what I mean? But like the guy I learned from, he had a degree. He had a degree in engineering. And when I went to work for a studio, I was like, well, I don't understand how to align this tape machine. He goes, oh, I'll teach you how to do that. Here's why we do it. And, but I learned why we do things and why we don't learn things. And I think a lot of that now is gone because there's not the curation of talent through the studio system. But then the studio system's gone because now everybody has a laptop and everybody can make a record in their bedroom, on their iPhone or whatever. And record labels are fine with it because they don't have to pay big budgets.
Mm.
So, you know, the democratization, is that the right word, maybe, of the recording industry, where it went from the gilded halls of famous studios, which, of course, cost a lot of money, by the way, to everybody's bedroom. The beauty is everybody can record, and everybody can make a record, and everybody can put a record out. The bad part is not everybody should. You know, that's what the record labels and studios weeded out because it was expensive to record a record. This console right here in 1986 was $309,000. Now that's about $980,000 today. All right. I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford one of these. I couldn't afford $1 million console. But recording studios could because they had label work that was coming in that wanted to use this console.
Sure.
And the reason why the labels had in 1986 had label work is that everybody and their brother was making compact discs. Compact discs were $20, and everybody was making money hand over fist and snorting a lot of cocaine. But that's not here nor there.
So Vance, you've had the opportunity to work with Jack White on several projects. Can you share what it's like to collaborate with him as an artist, and what makes Jack so unique?
I love Jack White. He's one of my favorite people. I see him all the time. I saw him a couple of months ago. He sent me my birthday was the other day. He sent me a nice little note about it. He's probably the most talented musician. This is weird because I know a lot of great musicians. He's probably one of the most talented all-around musicians that I know. In other words, he's a fantastic piano player. He's a fantastic B3 organist. One of my favorites, actually. Synth, super cool. Guitar, of course. Great bass player and an amazing drummer. You know, and his vocals are awesome. But he's one of the nicest guys, very down to earth for being what people think Jack White's all about. He's fucking great. You know, he's on tour now in the States. They're driving around in a van and just randomly calling up clubs and being like, "Hey, can we play?" You know, that's pretty cool, man. That's pretty cool. So, you know, I haven't really done anything with him since 2018, the last Raconteurs record, but we stay in touch. His studio's like not up the street, but a couple miles from me here. His engineer, Bill Skibby, will call me every now and then, like asking me how something at Jack's studio worked, because I used to work there so much, you know, and it's great. I love having him. He's fabulous. And, he was never a guy who said, "I want this to sound like this." He was always like, "Hey, we need to record mandolin." Okay. He's like, "What if we put some reverb on it?" I'm like, "Okay, what about this?" He's like, "Oh, that's cool." You know, like that kind of, like not like I've got this pinpoint idea of what I want this to sound like. It's like, let's see what you come up with, and then we'll massage it into what we're doing. And that's wonderful, because that's basically him allowing me to do my thing. And I'm helping him do his thing. And that's the perfect, thing that an engineer and an artist can do together.
You were involved in the production of Another Way to Die. So can you tell us more about that production?
It's a long time ago. So I had, back in those days, I worked at Blackbird. I was a chief engineer at Blackbird. And Jack had been in to do a project. Now, I'm trying to think here. I think this is after he had done Icky Thump. But it was after Icky Thump and after we had done the Raconteurs record together. He called me one day. Now, of course, Jack doesn't have a telephone. So he calls me one day from Patrick Keeler's phone. and or no, from Jack Lawrence's phone. He's like, "Hey, are you at your studio?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'm coming in." He was just at the front door, which is hilarious. And he's like, "Hey, we've got something we need to record. Can you do it tonight?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Now, do you have a tape machine?" I go, "I don't at the time." He goes, "Well, that's okay. It's just a demo." I go, "All right." He goes, "It's gonna be LJ and I." I go, "All right, cool." So he goes, "I'll be back about 5." So he leaves, comes back about 5, and he's like, "Here's how it goes." He's going to play piano. So I set up a vocal mic,
Mm-hmm.
and he played piano and sang it into this. It wasn't a vocal mic. It was he didn't really want a vocal mic. He just wanted something to go through an amp in the room. So like LJ could play along with him. Well, that is actually the vocal on the track,
No.
which is an interesting little side note. Some of it, just the
Mm-hmm.
first verse. But so I have, it's up there. I don't think you can see it. No, you can just barely see it. It's, hold it. It's right there. It's a TR-77 rhythm arranger.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "I've got this thing we can just do as a drum machine, for like a counter." He goes, "Oh, it's great." So he sort of hit some buttons and started it and kind of played and turned the knob, got the tempo right. And then we recorded the song. And obviously it was Another Way to Die. But it was different in that it had different lyrics, and I'll get to that in a minute. But and then he played drums on it. And then, LJ had played bass, and then Jack played guitar on it. And then we did some production stuff with the piano. He sang some background vocals. He sang some echoing parts that show up a little bit in the final recording. And then we did some editing that is in the record, in the Another Way to Die, the master. At the very end, there's this glitchy piano that goes and stops. That was actually from the demo. So we send this off. They take off. We went way late in the night, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't hear anything for a while. And then I had, if I remember right here, I went to South Africa and did a sort of what's the best word? Like a masterclass, sort of, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I got back, he called me. He said, "Hey, Raconteurs are playing Bonnaroo. Do you want to come?" Bonnaroo's a big festival down here. And I go, "Yeah, I've got tickets. I'm coming." He goes, "Cool. But we've got this thing we need to record at Blackbird. Do you mind, after our performance, coming with us to Nashville, and we'll set up, and because I got to get this done?" I said, "Okay, cool." So after their show, I drove to Nashville, and some gear showed up. And they didn't, but the gear showed up. We set up, and then the next day we recorded most of that song. The next day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say most of it, just we took the drum machine track that I had made, that Pro Tools session I'd made, and we transferred it onto tape.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started replacing the tracks on from the demo on tape. Then he came up with the sort of the chorus, that sort of middle piece. So we recorded that, and then we cut it into the middle of the tape. All right. Then it came up with the intro, and we cut that on the beginning of the tape. Then we restriped the whole tape, made a slave reel, and he was like, "I've got this thing I got to go do. I'll be back day after tomorrow." I go, "Okay." He goes, why don't you, if you get anything you got to clean up on the session, clean it on the tape, just clean it up, spend the day in here doing it. So we just took that whole entire tape, put it into Pro Tools, locked the two together, and we tightened the drums up just a little bit, just a hair here and there. And because there's 2 drum kits going on at different times. and we kind of tightened that up a little bit, so it wasn't flammy, even though that's part of the sound of it. But you know what I mean? It's like we just kind of tightened it up a little bit. And then that was really it. We came in the next day. He put the solo on, which was awesome. But he put it on. He goes, "Yeah, I'll come back and do that again later." He didn't. And then we did. And then he goes, so Alicia Keys is coming in tonight. I go, "Oh, okay." He goes, "Yeah, she's going to sing on this." I go, "Oh, cool." And she's got this private function thing to do in New York. So she's got to fly here, do the track. She can be here like 2 hours and then fly back to go to this private thing. I go, okay. So she came in. She was lovely. She was amazing. And she kicked ass. And then she was out, But part of what was cool is that when she came in, we played her the track. And she was like, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to sing on the chorus?" He's like, "No, I want you to sing the vocal lead." She's like, "Hell no." She says, "Listen to that. That vocal's awesome." And that was the demo that we had cut, And he goes, "Well, they made me change some lines. There was a line about Monty Penny. A Monty Penny sent honey to save you in the nick of time, I think, or something like that." And they're like, "Yeah, you can't do that because we haven't introduced Monty Penny in that series till later. It happens later, but so you got to take that out." So he had to change some lines. So we had to re-record it. And, from my recording of Sputnik to this, it's a little bit different. So, but then she went out there and she said, "Why don't we just do it together?" So they went out there together and they swapped lines back and forth. And she sang her part, and then he came in and sang his, and then she bailed. And then we sang, he sang his parts around her. And then we had strings come in. Now this is about 9:00 at night, right? So we had strings come in, and this is all tape again, remember, right? So 16-track tape. So we had a slave reel that had, like 12 tracks open. So we did a string pass on one track, a string pass again on another track, right? String pass again on another track, string track again on another track. So it's 4 tracks of strings, but they're basically 4 complete passes of a quartet. Because that's all we had. We just had quartet. And then I took those 4 passes and bounced them back to our master reel stereo, right? And I used the chamber at Blackbird to do. And then the next morning, we moved over to the Studio D, moved all the tape machines, everything. And we recorded the Memphis Horns, Wayne Jackson, the Memphis Horns. And then we recorded upright bass, and I mean double bass. So there's bowed double bass in the song. And we had this kid, he came in from Belmont. It was super cool, but we blew his mind by very speeding the tape machine up so that he could play the low D. Now, he'd never even in a million years ever conceptualized that you could do this, which, of course, you can't really do it in Pro Tools. You can't really do it. You can only do it on tape. Because Pro Tools is just speeding the sample rate up. Then when you put it back to normal. It's nothing different, right? So, and it's tricky. You have to have a sync and it's, but on tape, it's great. So we just went up to where he could hit the low D. And then he recorded a couple tracks of that, and this is on the slave reel. And then when we played it back at normal speed, of course, it's now lower than a double bass. So it's like boom, 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 boom. It's real stringy sounding. So you can really hear it at the end. And then we started mixing. We mixed the stereo till about 9 p.m. And then we mixed the 5.1 till about 5 a.m. And then I drove home, and my phone woke me up by about 9:00. Jack's manager was calling because Barbara Bacoli, who's the producer of the Bond film, needed the track because they were filming the opening sequence that day in Italy. So I drove back to the studio, and back in those days, we had a digi-delivery system. I digi-delivered it to them, and they took it across the lot on a compact disc. They made a disc and set it up for the director so that he could get the timing of all the dancing girls that are getting, and all the Bond shots and all that for the intro.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't, this is kind of like one of those weird deals. I think that what they actually wanted, originally Amy Winehouse was signed to do this track, and she couldn't do it, right? Then they offered it to Beyonce, and she wanted a lot of money, and they were like, yeah, we don't want that. Jack had turned it down 2 years before. So he turned it down. So they came back to him. But the Bond series had gone male vocal, female vocal, male vocal, female vocal. And so this duet was the first one. It kind of broke the rules. The one before, the song before us was Chris Cornell. It was really great.
Nice.
So yeah. But then when they got it, like they wanted the intro to be way shorter. If you watch the intro of Quantum of Solace, they actually make a non-musical edit. It's very much a film guy edit, where it edits. It makes an edit to the bridge part, kind of in the on the wrong beat. I mean, it's kind of a bummer. And then they didn't use it at the end. They almost always do it again at the end, the title track, but they didn't. So. And then at one point, they kind of wanted us to turn it into a power ballad. And Jack was on the road with the Raconteurs. He was like, look, man, I've bent my schedule as much as I can to do this. So, and there it was.
Nice story.
Coffee. Sorry, I need some coffee.
That's perfect.
That whole project happened between a Sunday to a Thursday.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's how fast they needed it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Friday morning is when I shipped it to him. So
cool. So
pretty crazy.
I know, but I really love the way you
all on tape. All on tape. Yeah. That's all on 2 16-track tapes.
Even crazier. Yeah. So I was saying that I really love the way the drum sounds on all those projects with Jack White. So can you share with us how do you achieve such distinctive drum sounds?
Well, they're usually the Quantum of Solace. That record, the main drum track, the groove track, is 2 microphones, 1 track. It's a Sony C500 out in front of the kick drum, and a Coles over the top.
4038.
Distinctive sounds are 4038. Yeah. Distinctive sounds are easy if you use not very many microphones. The Dead Weather was five mics. The Dead Weather. That's all we had because we only have a 16-channel board for everything. So 5 drum mics was it. There was a kick drum mic, a FET, a snare drum mic, and then there was a overhead, and then there was a mic over by the floor tom, kind of like a Glenn Johns setup, but and then he has 3 floor toms, so I don't mic them all. You just kind of mic the area, and then that's the recording, and then that was going on most of the first Dead Weather record. It's 1 track because it's all on 8-track. That was all 8-track. And then if you want the hi-hat louder, you add some 10K. On that, I wanted the snare a little louder. We got to mix, right? So how I did it? I automated the snare with my finger. Every time the snare went by, it went bang, 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 bang. I just did it with my finger. I mean, I just put a piece of tape under the fader, so I was only turning it up like a dB every time, and I just punched it every time the snare went by.
Whoa.
These are the things you know.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, putting a bunch of mics on it doesn't make it any better.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all recording in the same room. So more microphones are just going to get more bleed. You got Jack White playing at the other end of the room at full volume. I mean,
Hmm.
and singing sometimes, or Allison singing. So, yeah, depending on what project.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the kick drum should be the lowest instrument in the mix? I'm talking about tone, not volume.
Depends on the type of music.
Mm-hmm.
In rock and roll, yes, 100%. In R&B, no. The kick drum is a second fiddle to the bass.
Hmm.
The bass is the part. The bass is where the groove is anyway, right? That's what gets the girl's butt shaking. The butt shake. Get the groove on. The kick drum is there to just. The thing is, to me, in rock and roll, the kick drum is there to say this is rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This. Like if you go see a rock show and the kick drum doesn't take your breath away the first time you hear it, something's wrong. So yeah, I like the kick drum down there. That doesn't mean I get away with it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you have a band like bass players with the fifth string, 5-string. Like if they live down on that 5-string, they're right over the top of the kick drum. So now you have to make your kick drum a little faster. Do you know what I mean by faster? I mean by not so much low end as a entity, but more the upper, a little more mid-rangey as the front facing, so that you get the, hopefully in time, not like me, but you know what I mean. But you get that sort of sound,
Sure.
instead of boom, boom, boom. So,
do you think tuning the
yes,
snare and the kick to the tonic of the song is important?
not the kick, the snare. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. If you allow the snare to ring.
Uh-huh.
If it's a tight snare, if it's really dry, it doesn't really matter. But I definitely feel like all the toms should definitely be in tune with the key, because they'll make noise. If they make noise in tune, you don't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But they make noise and they're out of tune, you're definitely going to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever use samples in your drums?
Oh, sure. When I'm mixing, of course. Mm-hmm. But what I don't use sample packs or anybody else's. I use my own.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes tracks come to me and they don't have enough of what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'll even use samples in my own records if I want something that would have required us to pause and work on something, like drum wise, like really work on something to get a sound. I'll kind of be like, play the part. I'll do it later.
Mm-hmm. The other instrument that I'm always impressed in your recordings, it's the acoustic guitar. It's like I can smell the wood. So how do you record them? It's such a great tone.
So here's my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
I always record acoustic guitar with 2 microphones. All right. Now, those 2 microphones will change from time to time depending on what I want, where I want the acoustic guitar in the track, right? Mm-hmm. And whether the vocalist, whether guitar player is singing. Because often, like when recording Chris Stapleton, everything is a first take. So the acoustic guitar, the vocal, it's all the same take. Mm-hmm. So if we just, first of all, the acoustic guitar is always the same idea. I take on the body of the guitar, which is, back where the bridge is, right? I will either use, these are the microphones that I will use. I will use a U47. Mm-hmm. I will use a 67. I'll use a 77. All right. Each one of those has its own property, depending on what tone I want. On the other side of the guitar, which is the neck of the guitar, I will use a Gefell 582. right? Which I have one of. It's great. I'll use KM54 or a 56 preferred, or a 47. Actually, to be honest with you, the 48 is what I prefer, but that's hard to find. A 47 or maybe a 251. All right? But basically, it's the same idea. What I'm doing is I put one at the neck, facing right where the bridge is, facing the hole. Right? Sometimes the hand is in front of it when they're playing. This is by design. Okay? This is by design. And then I take another one, I make a Y. Right? So like, here's the guitar, here's the bridge, here's the neck, and they're like this. Okay? 90-degree angles at each other. This points right where the bridge and the neck and the body meet. Okay? And it's maybe in English, maybe 6 inches from the guitar. So whatever that is in centimeters.
Yeah.
And then I will take and hard pan those. I'll make sure they work in mono, because if they're at 90s, they'll work in mono. Hard pan them. And then sometimes I'll use a little bit of a LA3A compressor, but most of the time what I use is the Fatso. And I just use it just a little bit and take the warmth so that just a couple of lights come out of the warmth as the guitar is being strummed. Now, the strumming hand going in front of the microphone, this is kind of by design because it provides an extra rhythm that you normally wouldn't get by having that microphone sort of being bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark. You know what I mean? By being in front of it. So it's a stupid little weird thing, I've also before put a little bangle on the acoustic guitar player's wrist that had like tambourine jingles on it. Stupid shit like that. That's or put it on the drummer's hands or whatever, those kind of hand percussion things. But that's the deal. Now, if we have a vocal involved, what I do is I make a triangle. And so these two microphones would be the here and here of the triangle, and the vocal microphone would be right here. They're all the same distance away from the artist, and they're the same distance away from each other.
Cool.
All right? It's triangle. And then, especially with Chris, this is how I do Chris all the time. He never sings right up on the mic. He's always back, this far. And so that means that it's an area. All of this is part of the recording. And if he sings really loud, which he does, when he sings quiet, he'll lean forward. When he sings loud, he'll lean back. But when he leans back and sings hard, the Fatso will actually push the acoustic guitar down a bit, which actually is what you want. It sort of mixes it for me a bit. And if you listen to anything I've done with Chris in the last 7 years, you can hear that technique. Starting over, it's great. There's a song called Scarecrow, I think. That song is exactly that setup. Anytime he's playing an acoustic guitar, he's playing and singing at the same time. And that vocal take is the vocal take.
Cool. Thank you for that. I will try that the next time I'm recording acoustic guitars for sure.
There's one other little weird. There's one more. So the other one is if you have a stereo mic, like an R88 ribbon, put it lengthwise in front of the guitars, like this.
Yeah.
So one going up, one going down, and then hard pan it. It's shockingly amazing.
Cool.
That's a George Massenberg trick. I saw that.
So you have the chance to work with Radiohead, right?
One day.
What was that session like?
It was great. Tom was driving the ship. He was very nice. They were all very nice. Johnny was a little off on his own thing. But that didn't matter. They had Clive with them from Portishead. And he was kind of the main drummer. Johnny's brother played some percussion pads, things like that, and no guitars on any of it. It was all just keys and
Mm-hmm.
drums.
Oh.
It was fun. It was like
Mm-hmm.
6 hours, and we did 2 demos.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Basically, we recorded a demo for Identikit, which is on Moonshape Pool, and we recorded a demo for Super Collider, which was a summer thing they did,
Mm-hmm. Nice.
summer single.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were great. Tom
Cool.
invited me to his house. Cool. He used to be the neighbor of another client of mine, so
Oh.
yeah, that's why.
Uh-huh. Cool. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and stories with us today.
No, most welcome.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate
Most
this.
welcome.